What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Comfort Zone Commander podcast, your place for some casual, comfortable Commander conversations. I'm your host, Dan. That's your host, John. John, what are we talking about today?
So today, we're going to do another more personal conversation about some of our more formative years of playing Magic together. We didn't always have a huge playgroup or really any playgroup outside of each other, but we loved the format and we loved what it allowed us to bring to the table. So we're going to kind of go over what that did, what we did about that, and how that still kind of affected our deck building and our playing, even some stuff lasting through today. Don't forget...
Hey, we are still running our giveaway. Woo! So for you brave few audio listeners out there, this giveaway is only available this time on our YouTube channel. So head on over to YouTube to see us there, same name and everything, so on and so forth. But anyway, we are running this giveaway as a celebration of the release of the new set, Wilds of Eldraine, which we both love, as well as a way to say thank you to our early fans and early supporters. So to enter, we're running this giveaway for the first 100 subscribers. So all you got to do is be one of the first 100 subscribers and leave a comment down below in the comment section on YouTube on any of the videos during the duration of the contest, and you are entered. One entry per subscriber for this guy. So definitely go ahead and do that. And thank you and good luck. Anyway, John, why don't you get us started today? And we'll talk about how we kind of first got into this. How did we play when we were, kind of struggling to find the LGS? Or maybe even, why was it such a struggle? What's going on with the world?
Yeah, I mean, so even back in the day and today, it's kind of hard to find a regular LGS to play at. We had one. We knew of one. We knew where it was. But when you're 13 and your parents work and don't always want to drive 30 minutes, it's kind of hard to get to the local game store all the time. And even now, with LGS becoming less common, a lot of people just don't, you're moving around. Like I've moved recently and I just don't know the LGS community in the area that I'm in. So we didn't have a huge playgroup. We were the only two of our friends, aside from maybe one other guy who even really played Magic. And Commander, EDH, is a 4-player game, if you guys didn't know. And there's only 2 of us. So we ended up trying to play 4-player games with 2 people. So we each played 2 decks. The plethora of benefits and problems that came out of that, though, there were many. It was hard. It was super cool because we got to play Commander. That was the goal, right? We wanted to play Commander.
Yeah, for sure. So we at first, we were exposed to this format, like we talked about in other videos, but we found it so engaging and really cool with what you could do with the format, like the scalability and the crazy, splashy spells, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we were really attracted to it versus kind of the usual, grinding that it was in our 60 card formats that we were able to go to a lot of FNMs to do, but there wasn't even really a lot of support for Commander back then, in a general sense. So we didn't really have a Commander night at the store. Commander was really just something that people kind of got together to play on their own accord, or if they were just hanging out for free in the store. And, as you can imagine, being young, that was difficult to find, or find time rather to even be there or be part of it. And also, to go up to these guys who obviously were slightly intimidating, and try to be like, hey, we want to come to your Commander thing. When's the next time? So generally speaking, they were really interested in playing the format, but didn't have a ton of opportunity to set that up. I think now, with the flip side, here in adulthood, the world has just shifted in it's kind of gone this giant bell curve where, Commander got really popular, then it started getting support from LGSs, then things got a little bit more sanctioned. It was a little bit easier to find events and know where they are, when to go, and expect what you would expect from them, and the people that are bringing decks and how many people are going, blah 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 blah. And then there was the boom, and Commander became the most popular format, blah blah blah. And then all of a sudden, COVID happens and the world gets more technologically advanced. We introduced Spell Table. There's MTGO, and players start to recede in that shell of at home Magic, as well as little bit of fear just kind of going out of the house anymore. Product prices increase, wallets got tight, so on and so forth. So, Magic just had this big, reshape where now I feel like, a lot of LGS has suffered from recent world events and have either had to unfortunately close their doors or just go completely online in order to stay in business. And so with a lack of LGSs to an extent and an increased opportunity for, remote or online play, which has its other benefits, which we can speak on. Oh, yeah. But a lot of times what that ended up is creating this, I guess, barrier to entry to find, more of like a consistent play group, if you will, and have the opportunity to play with, 4 people as often as we would have desired. So like John was mentioning, we started this idea where, we wanted to play Commander in the more traditional sense of the format, which is the multiplayer experience, but we only had us. So we had to kind of come up with a creative ability to work around that, which led us to basically playing with just, the 2 of us, which led to some interesting complications, realizations, benefits, pros, cons, so on and so forth. Why don't you get us into some of that? What happened that was good or bad or so on and so forth?
Yeah, I mean, so I think something that really was a benefit long term to our playing of Commander, we had to have open conversations. A goal was that we wanted games to be fair. We wanted games to make sense. We were really, really careful in not trying to like sandbag one of the 2 decks we were playing. We really wanted it to feel as close as we could get it to 4 separate people playing the game. That's really hard to do when you know an entire extra deck's information. Mm-hmm. And the only way to kind of make that fair in a lot of ways was to let the other person know that information too. So we really had to make sure that we talked about as many things as we felt were pertinent so that each decision felt like it was the decision that made sense at the time.
Yeah, exactly. And, obviously that leads to a very interesting style of play where, basically the conversation was about the right thing to do at all times as opposed to what you wanted to do. Because when you're acting as, multiple players, you kind of lose that agency, if you will, right? You're not like, you are not a free agent anymore. You're not just one active player with one deck making decisions for you that could be informed by things like what you want to do for fun or pet cards that you want to show off or things of that nature. Instead, you're more or less just trying to make the most optimized decision to accommodate for the fact that you have information you really shouldn't have, right?
Yeah.
Like being exposed to, we would both pilot like the 2 decks. So being exposed to one whole other deck's information led to, sorry, my cat, led to this idea that, how do I make decisions based on that, pretending that I don't know it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And also having this empirical knowledge of things on the board at all times, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially even little things like some of the really cool moments you get in a game of Magic, Commander or not, is those gotcha moments. Those like, I had a thing, I have a response. If you have like a creature's effect and you have 15 creatures on the board, you might forget that activated ability, you might forget that trigger, you might miss that land utility thing. You can't get those moments when you have all the information. You have to make sure, okay, hey, if you do that, don't forget I have this thing. Or even just like, well, be careful because I have the ability to interact with that thing, so he might have the ability to do this. Like really having to go over things that there is no opportunity for miss, which means there's no opportunity for the plus side of somebody else missing something.
Yeah, and even with respect to like what would be hidden information, like what was in the hand, right? Even though we knew, you know what I mean? Because we knew, there was kind of this weird justifying conversation we had to have of like, well, what assumptions could we make and what would be within the realm of fair, right? Because like a lot of times, like, even nowadays, you still try to do that to the best of your ability when you're playing at a table. What kind of deck do they have? What's their commander? What lines can I expect that are maybe like combo based, or what pieces staples that I know might show up? What would be the density of control pieces, so on and so forth. Like these are things that we're thinking of kind of in the background, and exercising that predictive thought is, kind of subject to the individual player. both our, play experience, skill, luck, and exposure.
Yeah.
So with all those things factoring in to make each individual's kind of analysis a little bit unique, ours was not in this case. It was
Yeah.
very discussion based. It was, sometimes, those like Socratic dialogues where we're saying, well, we can assume this, but he already, cast these. So, there's probably this much percentage of this left in the deck. And the odds are having a hand of like 9 cards and he might have one of these responses. Like, we want to be careful about that, and you get these very meta play styles that, again, we're hinting at a lot of the complications here of, how that doesn't reflect normal play. But, that was really like the issue, I think. And it created a difficult way of kind of evolving out of that experience,
Oh yeah.
back into standard community play, which I definitely want to talk about in a moment. But I also think there were some benefits
Oh yeah.
as far as like the skill of us as players and the information that we received from that process, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no, I mean, there definitely was a huge element in like game analyzation. Like, I got so much better at like looking at the board and taking into account things that I didn't when we started. Like, we had to evolve very quickly in like understanding what things could be indicative of other things, and analyzing the effects those things could had, almost in a very like chess move scenario. Like, we no longer were able to look 1 turn ahead. We had to look 2, 3, 4 turns ahead to like, well, not just what am I doing, but what is he gonna do because of that? What might he do because of that or that? And what might he do because of that or that or that before I even get a turn again? And one of those turns is going to be me again. So like really having to take that, analyzing and cement my ability to do it and to do it accurately was a huge thing for me,
Yeah, well, for sure. And I think that, like, again, the complication that arises there is that, when you practice that mentality so often, like the specific, like, subjugating of your personal bias, to remove it to the most purest, like to distill our own like personal views in the game and decisions, and like it is so hard to then go to a regular game table and kind of take the training wheels off, turn off the chess mind, and sometimes just play to have fun and use game pieces that are interesting, and forgive others for maybe not making the most optimized decision at all times. This was something that, again, admittedly was really complicated for me. I think I had a lot of struggle with that, like, because we played like this for so long and in isolation in our little play group that, when I went back to tables and I saw people sometimes making the choice that made no sense by my own, biased derivation from the chess style thought that we had, I was feeling judgmental, or I had that inclination to want to say like, hey, like, but what about that over there? And how do you not think that that's maybe just like the bigger threat in order to not make the decision you're making now? But that's not how Commanders played, and that was hard to unlearn. But it was important to unlearn,
Oh, definitely. No. And I mean, one thing that as much as it was hard to unlearn, some of it to me felt good getting back into that. I mean, I think it's really reflective of how we play now, in that sometimes I just run cards. I could not give you a justification for every single card in every single deck I play that isn't, well, yeah, but that card is really cool. Or like that.
Yeah.
I used that card one time and it was one of the coolest interactions ever. And it happens 1 in every 10,000 games. But that one time was super cool. And something that affected me when we were doing those conversations. Do you know how hard it is? Again, I know you know. But how hard it is to be like, I know that guy is going to counter the spell that I'm about to cast. But I do not have a logical justification to assume he has a counter. And the best thing for me to do with my information is to play this really cool card. And to cast it, knowing it's just going to get thrown into the trash, is such a hard thing to look at. Like,
well, especially because in some circumstances, even though you can assume that a person has a counter or not, and that decision again is going to be a very personal decision in the moment with your deck, assessment, so on and so forth. So knowing he has a counter, you almost feel more that you need to cast the spell in order to not feel like you're cheating. You know what I mean? Because you're assuming that guy would have countered it, blah, 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 but like, what if the person didn't counter it? Maybe their threat assessment was a little skewed, or they assumed somebody else might have something just edged out a little bit more powerful. It's so hard to make those assessments in a vacuum with exposure to more knowledge than you should have, and then the pressure to act accordingly. So, it was definitely interesting, to say the least. But again, like, this is when we were younger, but coming out of it, like, trying to get back into that really taught me a lot about how, Commander as a format, is the one for me. It's the reason. It reminded me of why I originally picked the format. Not that season wasn't fun. We had a lot of fun doing it, but it was playing our own kind of mini game, if you will. Like, not that we weren't playing the format, but you understand, like, the mentality was totally different. So coming back out of it is like kind of reminded me why I was originally attracted to the format, because it can be big and splashy and have a ton of versatility, which a lot of times comes down to the human level. You know what I mean? Like, who the person is making and adding the versatility. And getting back to that experience, coming from where we were at, reminded me of why I love Commander, while also at the same time, probably making me a better player with my, like, assessment skills.
Oh yeah.
So, like, it's not like there are no benefits, you know what I mean? Like we had already kind of touched on, but like, I did feel like, I was ready to assess a situation in a very calculated manner, in order to make the best decisions, which made me a more skillful player. And then I also had to practice not doing that sometimes so I could just have fun, which made me just a better social player. Which doesn't mean, again, like, playing to lose or anything, but it does mean, like John said, like, including some cards in your deck that are, just in there because they're flavor, or they're a pet card, or they do something fun in the game that doesn't necessarily push you immediately to victory, but pushes you to a position of advantage while having a little bit of, kind of an entertaining interaction or play style. But, because we kind of continued down the road of playing in our own mini group at the same time as having these experiences, obviously here we are on the channel. Me and John still play solo all the time, even though we don't technically play dual Commander. We play multiplayer Commander, but in this 1v1 kind of iteration of it, at least for now. Don't worry, we're going to get some guests on, in the future, but we got to grow there. So definitely hit those sub buttons and help us get there. But, we still, even if we get there for the channel, we play together all the time just because we enjoy it. We know we always have each other in the bag. So from our last experience to now, we kind of have some principles we just have changed our deck construction with, just to accommodate our personal way of playing, our house rules or rule zeros, if you will. I mean, it's not too crazy, but, there's a couple of ways that we play differently, and maybe some of you guys can relate. John, what's one of the things that we do?
I mean, probably the biggest thing, and the thing that we, believe it or not, only actually started doing when we started making videos for you guys, was we don't play commander damage. If we're playing like a casual 1v1 game, we just don't even track it. It's an additional thing to track, which, again, when we were already trying to track things for 2 decks each, having to add on commander deck, it just wasn't worth it. It was like, the games are going to get shorter. We're trying to have these really complex things going on. We're trying to have each deck do its thing as best as we can. Trying to put commander damage in there just, like, really wasn't worth it. And I don't really think it modulated the game in a negative way, aside from the fact that some decks probably would have been stronger at the time than
I mean, we did mess around with some commander damage builds at the beginning, or at least I know I did. I can't recall if you had, like, a particularly, like, Voltron style build at the early start. But I did build Uriel the Miststalker, and I did build Rafika the Many way back in the day. And again, this is early days. This is when Uriel the Miststalker was, like, the Voltron commander.
One of the best,
or, like, one of the only. Like, again, back in, like, the really early days of Commander. So I had chased that rabbit for a minute. And I think in our 4-player experience, it was underwhelming. Like, it was either really hard to interact with, or it just wasn't too terribly fun, especially when you're playing like multiple decks at the same time. I think that the enjoyment then came not from like winning or necessarily like power, since like the win didn't feel extremely personal. You know what I mean? Because again, we're operating multiple decks, so it's not like I won if one of my decks won.
Yeah.
It was really just like, oh, let's see how this game plays out. And it always felt worse to me when it was the Voltron player that would have won, because it felt like they earned it the least. Which again, I know that like sounds like a really hot take. It probably makes some people go like, but like I'm not saying Voltron's negative, at this point. I'm saying it was negative for us in our experience, because a lot of the decks had so many complicated interactions and pieces going on, in the Voltron decks, at least back then, the way we constructed them, were very like, ooh, here's the thing I put on your reel. Here's another thing I put on your reel. Hopefully kill somebody. But, I mean, did you feel similar?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, I actually think that my first Voltron deck was whatever my first equipment deck variant was, which, not that I haven't tried to build one of those for quite a few years, but not nearly as old as like or Uriel and Rafik. It just, what you said actually made me remind me of something that about the personal like winning and losing. Like there were quite a few games where we tried to pick like weird matchups or complicated interactive matchups. Or it gave us a huge opportunity, and this is another one of the benefits of we played each other's decks all the time, because there wasn't like a struggle in learning each other's decks, because we saw the cogs, we saw the gears move in a lot of those interactive pieces. And like you said, it wasn't, well, you won, I won. It was, well, what would happen if we put one of these really strong decks with 3 weaker decks? Because 3 weaker decks working in conjunction with this knowledge, like, it almost turned, there were definitely some games that turned into like false archenemy just by virtue of having to make the right plays. And I think that was something that you just reminded me, that was really, really interesting. And again, we went from being able to play 5 decks each to 10 decks because we used each other's cards, which was just something I really enjoyed. I mean, that was really cool.
I agree. I mean, it was interesting. Again, like, it really creates kind of like this sub game. Like, it's not true like Magic the Gathering. Like every deck is fighting to win, but on the principle of like, we decided that like, well, obviously the right play is always to try to win. So, we're going to try to achieve victory in these decks, but it was more to see how things played out and less to see who walked away with the W, which again, eventually informed being able to play like back in normative ways, like going back to the experience of like, not really necessarily caring who walked away with the W, but learning to play less optimized and always make the right choice, and analyzing others' decisions under that perspective. That was kind of the hard part. But another thing that made like our personal, kind of play group or experiences a little bit challenging too was like this idea of, kind of like heavy removal, especially like in our 1v1 senses, and more specifically in terms of board wipes. Again, these are things that like have like kind of pillars of example, but I had built a deck at one point that was who was the guy? Oros, I guess. Oros, one of the dragons. Yeah. You guys know the ones when they connect, you pay 3 and you do some jank. So he wasn't relevant to the deck, but basically the whole deck's vibe was like board wipe typo, if you will. Like the idea was like major stall to a point where I could just hit combo lines, which in both of our like, 2 players, 4 decks style games, and then eventually, going back to just like kind of playing these 1v1s more often, presented a lot of complications. Even in terms of just the time it took to play them, but like in the 4-player games, the decision of like when to rip the board wipe off was extremely complicated. Like when to cast it from like a fully generic, optimized, empirical, this is the right time conversation is very hard. And then in the 1v1s, board wipes can often either just end the game immediately or make the game take forever. And, both things led us to kind of adjusting house rules wise, not with a definitive rule, but kind of how we approach that. What did we end up doing?
I mean, again, with overall probably running less of them, it also was at a time where like Wrath of God and Damnation were still 2 of like the best board wipes you could run. So like you said, the time and resetting, that a board wipe felt like a hard reset in most of our games. Now you have the ruinous ultimatums, and you have the one that destroys everything that's not an artifact, destroy everything without a counter on it. There are so many more board wipes to me that feel like game enders that at the time we didn't have. So we weren't running as many because, again, if we talked about every single interaction in a 4-player game, there were definitely times we spent like 6 hours playing one game of Commander, and then we're like, well, the right move's a board wipe. And we were like, is it though? Is it? Are we sure? Are we sure that's the right move? Because it added so much, and we weren't using them because they weren't available. Those like, oh, well, if I board wipe, I can just kill everybody. Oh, if that had been the case, I think that might have caused us to not make some of those same decisions. And I mean, aside from kind of all the, running less board wipes, I feel like there also was a huge relegation of high power cards and kind of subsequently expensive cards. Not that we didn't run strong cards. I mean, you mentioned it before, you did run Earthcraft in the token deck, which was insanely cool. Yeah. I did have a lot of, the Living Death in my Reanimator deck, which was nutty with all the ETBs and stuff. So yeah. we did a lot of like, and it kind of goes back to the power conversation that we already mentioned in that other episode. You guys want to check it out. But kind of keeping power where it belonged. We weren't splashing super strong cards in super weak decks. Not that we built weak decks on purpose, but we wanted to make sure that kind of the cards fit the power level of the deck. And I think that also assisted with our proxying. Again, we played with each other. We were the play group. So we also didn't have jobs. So there were a lot of cards that we couldn't get our hands on outside of ripping them in draft booster boxes. We didn't have the other stuff. So if we wanted a super rare, super good card, I don't think either of us own a Jace the Mind Sculptor even still. And that card was... Everybody had one. Everybody ran them. They were in Commander. They were in Standard. But we also didn't want to start proxying the original dual lands, because that didn't make a whole lot of sense. So some of those high power cards, which were also high costed cards, we didn't proxy. We wanted to make sure, I didn't have money to buy 10 Birds of Paradise, but I wanted to run birds in a lot of my decks. So we kind of limited ourselves in the proxies to kind of keep it fair, that we weren't just running 100,000 bazillion dollar cards, because that wouldn't have made any sense.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that again, some of this just kind of all naturally builds itself, some kind of wackadoo Jenga tower where, in playing, I think at the start, like John mentioned, I had an Earthcraft in my token deck. It wasn't in there because I knew or really assumed it was this insane card. I traded a buddy who told me it might be good, and I'm like, oh yeah, it sounds all right, and then it was obviously cracked, and we know it today to be one of the strongest, token synergistic pieces. But in playing those 4-player games, the way that we played them, it was this level of expectability. Not that again, Commander is about versatility, but you have to understand the way we played, a lot of the times is things being expected or easier to play the chess game we were playing. You know what I mean? So yeah, at least for myself, when you have these ridiculously cracked high power pieces kind of just peppered in and among decks that theoretically, if you talk power level or whatever, should be down in the mid-range area, all of a sudden, it's totally unexpected, and it changes the whole map of the game. So at least for me, trying to do that thought process and that calculation of, what deck is going to come out with this, and where our deck's sitting at, and who's the threat at the table at the time, part of that expectation was assisted by, relegating higher powered cards, for what, whatever that phrase really means, to our, assessment into these decks where it's okay, that was going to be kind of the arch enemy, or we're going to play one of these 4-player experiments, but we're going to use the high power decks. And, eventually that organically led to kind of how we build decks nowadays, but it's just a little bit more tooled for the multiplayer experience, a little bit more tooled for, again, creativity, expression, so on and so forth, as opposed to just constantly chasing power. And like John was mentioning about expensive proxies, I think that, there's this idea that we came up with where I don't know, for a while, we called it $20-$30 was you really had to justify it. If you wanted to proxy a card that was 20 to 30 bucks. Like it had to be like necessary for the deck to function.
Yeah.
Anything after that was like unforgivable. Like for us, like, and again, it's a weird thing, right? Because neither me nor John, if I could be so bold as to speak for you, like really felt that like, again, like the game should have like these paywalls to a level of its experience. But there are certainly these like high power upper echelon cards where it's like you need big bucks to own and operate this card, which left it that it was a less commonly played card. So even in terms of going back into the community, expensive proxies would be really complicated at tables because, people have this general expectation that like some cards that are inaccessible due to price, they're not going to be seeing. So they don't proxy them out of respect for that kind of principle. So we don't want to do the same out of respect for that same principle. And it became this reflective idea of like trying to be respectful with what we assume we can play with and what the other player might be expecting in our deck. Because if we come out with some crazy $100 Force of Will that's a proxy in a deck where like everything else is kind of mid-range jank and it feels a bit of a whammo. Not to say that like if you owned one and had it in your mid-range jank that it wouldn't still be a whammo, right? So I don't know, it's complicated, but I think we can all agree that there's this principle where you don't want to go too heavy with your proxies and have like a bunch of Moxen and Mana Crypts and everything in every single one of your decks, because it's just not the play experience you expect from every deck. Do you know what I mean?
No, definitely. I definitely think, even something as simple as I had that mono green elf deck for a zillion years. I didn't own a Gaia's Cradle. Had I shown up to the LGS and been like, oh yeah, here's my proxy Gaia's Cradle, I would have gotten some looks. And that even is like a card you might have expected in a deck like that, but you definitely didn't expect the 13-year-old with an elf deck to own one. So it kind of, there was definitely, I think that, again, the expectations and what you kind of could assume about a deck and a player and a level and a price point was like the perfect way you could have said that. I think that really kind of stands.
Which is interesting, right? Because nowadays, like, I'm more tuned for, expect the unexpected. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but it doesn't necessarily mean like I'm like all for proxy whatever you want. I don't know. Honestly, really, there's no perfect way to like describe an idea for it, right? Like that is the right way to handle proxies.
Yeah.
This is really just me and John's personal take on it. And what we ended up doing was exactly that. Like, we set like this $20 to $30 kind of range, and if you were even hovering around there, we would kind of like explain like, oh well, this card, it's necessary for XYZ reason, like it's part of the deck's objective combo or something of that nature, and that was justifiable. But anything past that, we kind of had this idea that, we probably weren't going to touch on it. And that became our little bit of a house rules. Your budget for proxies is $20 or less. Otherwise, we have to at least talk about it, and know where the deck is at. Is that the way that you guys handle things? I don't know. Actually, as per usual, we want to know. So, part of doing this podcast is to try to get input from you guys in the community and have these conversations more openly and more comfortably. So, how do you guys handle expensive proxies? And also, let us know about these other ideas that we talked about. Can you relate? What does your play group look like? Is it harder for you to find an LGS nowadays? Do you find yourself wanting to play Commander but not having enough people sometimes? Or you maybe play with one buddy or two, and how does that affect your gameplay experience? I think that all of us have like our own Magic journey, and it's just very interesting to see where everybody comes from. So again, we can approach a table with a more open mind and understand that like we all have our varied experiences, and that, if there's any kind of like tie together for this whole thing, is I think that this experience for me and John is kind of where I learned to do that. I started with the maximum, right? Hyper analytics, hyper power builds, what is the right choice at all times? Everybody needs to act within that ordained line of thought. Otherwise it's wrong. And I got to evolve out of that with John, always by my side, obviously, into something that's more of a comfortable, community-minded, approach that is about having fun and creative expression and so on and so forth, and allowing that space for ideas to be a little bit more, self-decided, a little bit more, like variable as opposed to prescriptive based on some kind of formulaic style of play. And that's it, right? That's the takeaway. We're all just trying to be more, comfortable and be able to play more Magic with more people. This is the best way to do that,
Yep.
And wouldn't you say the same?
Oh yeah, no, I mean that's why we're one of the things we want to get out of what we're doing is like we play with each other, but we want to be able to do that and show that and possibly getting down the road, we definitely want to make sure we're involving people in the community and hopefully eventually getting people involved in some of the games.
Exactly, yeah, and getting you guys on spell table with us and so on and so forth. But anyway, I think that about wraps up the convo. So again, if you guys don't know or weren't around for the intro, feel free to jump on that giveaway train. We got that box. So if you're, here at the end of the video, thank goodness for you. You made it through all this, random conversation about our annals and our history. So way to go, you. Your reward is hit that subscribe button so you can get in on this giveaway. And of course, our thanks and our love, and it makes it all worth it. We put a lot of time into this, believe it or not, in conjunction with our random lives, banking and raising kids and so on and so forth. So it makes it all worth it to see any of you guys be able to listen, relate, enjoy, and hopefully, gain some, information or benefit from it. So without anything else on the docket for today, we're going to talk with you guys in the multiverse.